The fabric of my dress felt like a cage. Not because it was tight, it was a flowing, custom-made sapphire silk, but because it was an artifact of a life I'd been allowed to touch but never truly possess. I stood near the back of the enormous ballroom, watching my cousin, Clara, marry Robert. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and the perfume of old money. Every glint of crystal, every whispered toast, was a reminder of my permanent, outsider status. I was a comma in the family's grand, gilded sentence, not a full stop. It had always been this way. My mother, bless her fierce, practical soul, had been the mistake. The brilliant, scholarship-winning younger sister of Eleanor Hawthorne, the matriarch who now presided over the wedding with the cool, benevolent glare of a queen surveying her dominions. My mother chose love over leverage, a kind but unremarkable man over a strategic alliance, and in doing so, she traded generational wealth for a quiet life in a small house with a mortgage. I, Alara, was the legacy of that choice, a shadow at every sun-drenched family gathering, forever smelling the sea but never quite dipping my toes in the water. This wedding, however, was supposed to be a truce, a ceasefire. Clara, despite her sometimes bratness, was the closest I had to a sister. We shared childhood secrets whispered over chipped china tea sets at my house and lavish, silent dinners at hers. When she asked me to be her maid of honor, I didn't hesitate. I'd spent the last 6 months organizing, coordinating, and managing the sprawling chaos of a truly wealthy wedding. I scheduled florists, taste-tested catering, soothed the groom's panicked mother, and most importantly, handled the sensitive, intricate financial negotiations that underpinned the entire affair. It was the only way I knew how to belong, by being indispensable. My full-time job was as a high-level executive assistant at a firm that specialized in asset restructuring, a polite term for cleaning up the financial messes of the privileged. I had a mind for numbers that was sharp, relentless, and almost predatory. It was a skill my mother had always told me to guard, to use only for myself, but I couldn't help but deploy it for the family. Hopping the sheer utility of my presence would eventually earn me a seat at the main table, not just a folding chair tucked in the corner. The ceremony was beautiful in a predictable way. Vows exchanged under a massive arch of white roses, the soft, trembling voice of Clara, the slightly too loud enthusiasm of Robert. I stood beside her, my smile aching, my mind already running through the checklist for the reception. Did the vintage champagne arrive? Was the seating chart correctly arranged to avoid the old feud between Aunt Beatrice and Uncle Peter? Everything was perfect. During the cocktail hour, I finally allowed myself a small glass of the very expensive French white wine I had personally vetted. I leaned against a velvet rope, watching the tableau of designer gowns and practiced laughter when my Aunt Eleanor approached. She moved with the silent, terrible grace of a predator, her charcoal suit tailored to architectural perfection. "Alara," she said, her voice dry and cool, like linen left too long in the sun. She didn't offer a kiss on the cheek or a word of thanks. "Aunt Eleanor, congratulations. Clara looks incredible." "Yes, she does. And the reception is running smoothly, I assume. I saw you sorting out the music volume a moment ago. Good." She took a sip of her own drink, her eyes never quite meeting mine. They were always looking past me, focusing on some distant, more important point on the horizon. "It's all set. The band knows the schedule, the caterer has the final count, and the valet service is running efficiently." I recited the bullet points, a little too quickly, hopping to earn a genuine smile. Instead, she sighed, a small, weary sound that nonetheless felt like a judgment. "You've been helpful, Alara, truly, but you need to understand something." My internal alarm bells, the ones I had been ignoring for 6 months, finally started to clang. I braced myself. This is a milestone for our family, a merging of 2 very prominent legacies. It requires a certain decorum. She paused, letting the word hang in the air, heavy with implication. "I saw you talking to Mr. Harrison earlier, the one with the real estate portfolio. You were discussing his hedge fund. That's inappropriate." I blinked, confused. He asked about my work. I was simply explaining. "You were trying to network, dear, and I appreciate your ambition. But you are here as Clara's relative, nothing more. You're not part of the family in the way that matters to the Harrisons. You don't have the last name, the inheritance, or the pedigree. They are potential investors for Robert's new venture. Your input cheapens the conversation. It makes us look desperate. The words landed not like a slap, but like a scalpel, precise, clean, and deeply cutting. All the late nights, the stress, the perfect execution of every single detail evaporated in that one dismissive sentence. You're not part of the family. I was the maid of honor, Aunt Alina, I managed to say, the silk of my dress suddenly feeling like rough burlap against my skin. I've spent half a year ensuring this day was perfect. And you have been compensated. Your mother received a generous check to cover your costs and more as a thank you, but your role is over now. You were a functionary, Alara, not a foundation. Go enjoy the party, but please refrain from soliciting business contacts. Keep a low profile. You're simply not one of us. She gave me a tight, unconvincing smile, a mask over the steel of her contempt, and then, without waiting for a reply, she glided away to greet a senator. I stood there, a sapphire statue in a room of dancing gold, the taste of ashes in my mouth. Not one of us. The phrase was a familiar demon, but hearing it now, on the day I had worked hardest to earn my place, was devastating. The maid of honor dress felt less like an honor and more like a uniform, a service apron. I took a deep, shaky breath, the resolve solidifying in my chest, cold and hard. Fine. If I was just a functionary, then I would behave like one. If I was not a member of the family, then I had no familial obligation. I was simply a service provider whose contract had now been fulfilled. I pushed away from the velvet rope, my mind no longer on the wedding, but on the contracts. 6 months ago, in the frenzy of pre-planning, Alina had casually delegated the setup of the electronic payment systems for the reception's myriad vendors to me. It was a detail too small and boring for her to bother with, but essential for the smooth operation of a party of this magnitude. She had given me full access to a newly established checking account, the Hawthorne Bridal Expense account, with clear instructions that it was the sole source of funds for the day's last-minute costs. A $100,000 limit, she had told me, laughing, just in case the cake melts, darling. The account details were still live on my secure company phone, a device that could interface with virtually any banking network. In my line of work, we had to be ready for anything, which meant always having a secure financial conduit. I walked past the dance floor, past the giddy newlyweds, and into a small, elegant courtroom, locking the door behind me. I pulled out my phone. My fingers, usually trembling with the suppressed emotion of a lifetime of slights, were now steady, almost surgical. I bypassed the wedding planning app and opened the secure banking portal. I didn't need to check the balance. I knew it down to the cent. My job title, the one Aunt Alina scoffed at, flashed a warning in my mind. Asset restructuring specialist. It meant I knew how to move money, how to track it, and crucially, how to make it disappear, legally, cleanly, and with an undeniable paper trail that pointed exactly where it needed to go. Alina's words echoed in the silence of the courtroom. You have been compensated. Your mother received a generous check to cover your costs, and more, as a thank you. A generous check that barely covered the cost of the designer silk for the uniform she forced me to wear. I opened a new tab on my phone. The key was the florist. Specifically, the delivery of the 2,000 imported South American orchids that formed the magnificent centerpiece arch. The bill for those alone was exorbitant. I had negotiated it down, of course, but the original contract price, the one I had saved in my secure files as a just-in-case leverage point, was significant. With cold, focused determination, I began to work. I wasn't stealing. That was messy, illegal, and amateur. I was merely performing an immediate asset transfer and final expenditure reconciliation as per the emergency financial management powers Alina had blindly delegated to me. She told me to keep a low profile. I would. She told me I was a functionary. I would function. I pulled up the final negotiated invoice for the venue's rental and catering, the largest single expense, which Alina believed she had already fully paid through an old family account. She hadn't. I knew she hadn't. Only the deposit was paid. The final four-figure installment was always due upon the completion of the ceremony, a detail I had personally arranged with the venue manager, a man named Mr. Giannis, a week ago. I had insisted on setting up a new, streamlined, same-day electronic funds transfer, EFT, to ensure the vendor was paid the second the contract was fulfilled. Eleanor, busy with her high society seating charts, had merely signed off on the final payment structure. Now I executed it, but with a slight adjustment. The actual, final, four-figure installment for the main venue rental and catering was due, and I would make sure it was paid promptly, exactly as the contract stipulated. However, my compensation, the one Eleanor thought she'd handled with a generous check, was still outstanding in my mind. I opened the EFT request. Payee, Event Management Solutions, the name of the vendor I had created a week ago, a shell company owned by my own legitimate, tax-paying consultancy. Amount, a sum that was exactly the value of the 2,000 imported orchids plus the full cost of the generous check my mother was supposed to have received, minus the actual amount of the deposit already paid. The resulting figure, a sleek, devastating $4,000. Memo, final venue and catering balance, Hawthorne wedding event. I hit execute transfer. The transaction was instant, secure, and irreversible. It would show up on Eleanor's main statement as a final, immediate, and completely valid vendor payment. The paper trail was flawless. The money was moved from the Hawthorne bridal expense account into an account I legally controlled, disguised as a legitimate final-hour wedding expenditure. It was a perfectly executed maneuver, a professional fee for 6 months of unpaid, unappreciated work, extracted at the precise moment of maximum emotional vulnerability. I closed the app, put the phone back in my clutch, and smoothed the sapphire silk of my dress. I was no longer a functionary. I was a professional who had just collected her fee. When I stepped back out into the ballroom, the reception was in full swing. Clara and Robert were laughing, the band was playing a cover of an old rock song, and Aunt Eleanor was holding court at the main table, her back straight, her smile triumphant. She looked invincible. I walked over to the main bar. The bartender, a pleasant-faced young man I had personally selected, smiled. "Ms. Alara, what can I get for you?" "I think I'll have a shot of the oldest single malt you have," I said, my voice calm, almost serene. As he poured the amber liquid, a discreet vibration went off on my wrist, my work watch, set to alert me to any immediate critical system failures on the Hawthorne account. Not the small phone, but the dedicated, secure device for large transfers. The alert was concise, red, and beautiful. Account balance critical. $4,000 excess expenditure. Transfer complete. It wasn't a warning for me. It was a report. The bridal account was now $4,000 short of its intended final balance, the exact amount needed for the actual final payment to the main venue. The real vendor, Mr. Giannis, who had been expecting his final, large payment, would now receive a notification that the dedicated account had been depleted by $4,000. The EFT for the final, massive installment to him would bounce. I looked across the room at Aunt Eleanor. She was raising a toast, her face illuminated by the reflected glow of the crystal chandelier. She thought she was invincible. I raised my glass of single malt in a silent, private toast. "You're not part of the family," she had said. Correct, I thought, taking a sip of the smooth, burning liquid. "I'm not family, I'm a professional." It wouldn't be minutes, but perhaps an hour or two, before the venue's accounting system would flag the bounced payment. Mr. Giannis, a meticulous, highly professional man, would not wait long to discreetly notify the host. The $4,000 would be demanded immediately, or the wedding would stop. The bill would land, like a very expensive anchor, right on Eleanor's immaculate lap. And I, the functionary, would be the only one who could possibly fix it. I settled into the quiet, exquisite pleasure of waiting. The dance floor beckoned. For the first time all day, I truly felt like dancing. I had earned it. The single malt was a revelation, smoky, complex, and utterly grounding. I allowed the heat to spread through me. A welcome antidote to the icy dismissal I just received. I watched the scene unfold, not as a participant, but as the architect of a quiet, beautiful catastrophe. Aunt Alina, still radiant and oblivious, was receiving the congratulations of a man whose tie alone probably cost more than my monthly rent. She was basking in the illusion of effortless perfection, an illusion I had painstakingly created, and was now just as meticulously beginning to unravel. Timing had to be precise. Too soon, and I'd be accused of a simple, forgivable administrative error. Too late, and the entire event would devolve into a crass, unfixable disaster, which was not my goal. My goal was not to ruin Clara's day, she was innocent, but to deliver a surgical, undeniable strike to Alina's towering edifice of superiority. I needed the moment to be public enough to be humiliating, but private enough that only the key players would know the true, embarrassing details. I spent the next 40 minutes observing, occasionally nodding to guests, always keeping a careful eye on the main table. The band transitioned from classic rock to smooth jazz, and the first course, a delicate, tasteless affair of scallops and foam that I had personally argued against, was being served. Then the first sign. I watched as Mr. Giannis, the venue manager, a man whose gray suit hid the steel resolve of a man who ran a multi-million-dollar operation, approached the main table. He didn't interrupt Alina. He was far too discreet for that. He bent low, murmuring something into the ear of Charles, Alina's husband, a kindly, perpetually bewildered man who generally kept his head down and signed whatever tax documents Alina put in front of him. Charles frowned. He was a man whose expressions usually ranged from mildly pleased to vaguely confused. This was a new one, deeply alarmed. He put down his fork, leaving a perfect, untouched scallop on his plate. He then leaned toward Alina, interrupting her mid-sentence with the tie man. Whatever Charles said, and I imagined it was the single, horrifying word, payment, hit Alina like a physical blow. Her impeccable posture stiffened. The triumphant smile vanished, replaced by a momentary flash of pure, unadulterated shock. I could see her lips moving, her gaze flicking nervously to Mr. Giannis, who stood respectfully a few feet away, arms crossed, the picture of professional impatience. The transfer had landed. The paper trail had done its work. The account was depleted. Alina was a veteran of crisis management, having navigated the choppy waters of her husband's occasional bad investments. She recovered quickly. A tight, forced laugh, a subtle wave of her hand, dismissing the issue as a trifle. She spoke to Charles again, and I could read the command in her rigid shoulders. Fix it. Charles, now looking like a man who'd just been handed a lit fuse, got up from the table. He walked briskly toward Mr. Giannis, and the two men retreated toward a discreet side office, the exact office where I had negotiated the final payment structure a week prior. My heart began to thump a steady, triumphant rhythm against the confines of my sapphire dress. This was it, the moment of truth. I left my post by the bar, slowly making my way toward the restroom wing, a route that conveniently took me past the door to the small office. As I walked, I took out my phone, the secure company one, and activated the real-time financial tracking software. I needed to know, minute by minute, how the family was attempting to plug the leak. I slowed my pace as I neared the office door. The sounds were muffled, but the tone was clear, sharp, stressed, and escalating. I heard Charles's voice, strained. Impossible, Ilara handled all the final transfers herself. She showed us a sound of exasperation. Let me call the bank. Then Mr. Giannis, his voice calm, but radiating authority. Mr. Hawthorne, I assure you, my system does not lie. The dedicated account you provided has had a final EFT of $4,000 routed from it just over an hour ago, leaving it precisely $4,000 short of the final required installment. We need the full payment now. Our policy is clear. Our staff must be compensated. If the full balance is not settled within the next half hour, I'm afraid I will have no choice but to instruct my team to cease service. Cease service. That meant the band would stop playing, the waiters would stop serving the second course, and the open bar, the crown jewel of the reception, would close. The collective groan of hundreds of wealthy, inebriated guests would be deafening. I moved closer to the door, pretending to adjust the clasp on my purse. Charles's voice was laced with panic. But where did the $4,000 go? It was meant for. Wait, Alara said she set up a small contingency payment for a vendor. Was there a mistake? He was grasping for an explanation. A simple mistake. He didn't understand the complex financial judo I had performed. He only saw the bottom line. A new voice, sharp and furious, cut through the door. Eleanor. She must have joined them. A mistake. Charles, the entire family is watching. Get a hold of your private accounts. Transfer the money. Just pay him and then we'll handle that little nuisance, Alara, later. Now the true, exquisite complication. Charles was not the primary controller of his own wealth. Eleanor was. And the accounts she controlled were not the kind you could access instantly with a phone and a password. They were trusts, offshore holdings, and generational assets locked down with 3-factor authentications, high-level bank managers, and a 2-day settlement period. This wasn't spending petty cash. This was moving serious money. I heard the sound of a phone violently slammed onto the desk. Eleanor's voice was a hiss. They've put a hold on the wire transfer. It won't clear until Tuesday. This is ludicrous. I'm Eleanor Hawthorne. I don't run out of funds. Mr. Giannis responded, his tone unwavering. I'm sorry, Mrs. Hawthorne. My systems don't recognize status, only cleared funds. 30 minutes. The band is on the clock. I heard Eleanor let out a sound of pure, helpless rage. They were trapped. They were in the middle of their perfect, multi-million-dollar event, and they were short $4,000, an amount that, to me, was a month's rent, but to them was a meaningless speck of dust that had suddenly brought their entire world to a halt. I calmly continued my walk toward the restroom, letting the sound of their desperation fade behind me. I checked my work watch. The notification was still red. No one had been able to solve the problem. I paused at the entrance to the ladies' room, checked my reflection, a picture of calm, controlled elegance, and then I turned back. This was the moment for the functionary to re-engage. I walked back toward the office door and tapped lightly. Aunt Eleanor, Uncle Charles. Is everything all right? I asked, injecting the perfect level of concerned innocence into my voice. The door flew open. Eleanor stood there, her face mottled with suppressed fury, her diamond earrings practically vibrating. Charles stood behind her, defeated, clutching his empty wallet. Mr. Giannis watched with the cool patience of a man who knew he held all the power. Alara, thank God, get in here, Charles pleaded, his voice cracking. Eleanor cut him off with a glare. What do you want? I thought I told you to keep a low profile. I stepped into the office, my sapphire dress catching the light. I addressed Mr. Giannis first, professionally. Mr. Giannis, please excuse the interruption. I was involved in setting up the final EFT protocol for Mrs. Hawthorne. I overheard your conversation. I apologize for any error on my part. Mr. Giannis looked at me, relieved that someone spoke the language of contract and finance. Ms. Alara, it's a simple matter. $4,000 is missing from the designated account. The final wire transfer has failed. I turned to Eleanor, my expression thoughtful. Aunt Eleanor, Uncle Charles, did you attempt to contact the bank? Of course we did, Eleanor spat. The funds are locked up. We can't access the liquid capital for 2 days. This is scandalous. I see, I murmured, rubbing my chin, adopting the familiar posture of the corporate troubleshooter. A wire hold, that's typical for large, unsecured transfers. They need to verify the source. It's a standard anti-fraud measure. I paused for a dramatic beat. However, the wedding needs to continue. I looked directly at Eleanor. My gaze was steady, confident, utterly unlike the timid girl she usually saw. You need a bridge loan, Aunt Eleanor, an immediate, unsecured line of credit to cover this final payment. And you need it to transfer digitally, right now, through a reputable, verifiable source. Charles looked at me, hope flickering in his eyes. Can you do that, Alara? You work in finance, you must know a way. Eleanor remained skeptical, her arms crossed. You, with what bank? Your salary barely covers your rent, child. Don't be ridiculous. I smiled. It was a slow, professional, utterly chilling smile. No, Aunt Eleanor, not my bank, my consultancy. My firm handles rapid asset deployment and short-term liquidity solutions for high-net-worth clients facing immediate, unexpected liabilities. It's a key part of my job. We have a fund specifically designed for this kind of time-critical, low-figure, high-urgency transfer. I pulled out my secure company phone again and placed it on the desk. I can execute a fully verifiable, legally compliant $4,000 bridge loan from my firm's liquid assets account to Mr. Giannis's system. It will clear instantly. The wedding will continue. The tension in the room was palpable. Mr. Giannis looked intrigued. Charles looked desperate. Elinor looked utterly defeated, yet still fighting. "And what," she sneered, the word tasting like rust on her tongue, "is the collateral for a $4,000 loan, Alara? And the interest rate?" "The collateral," I said, leaning in, my voice dropping to a low, intimate register that demanded her full attention, "is quite simple, Aunt Elinor. It's the immediate continuation of your perfect, multi-million-dollar event. And the interest rate is an administrative fee that will be settled when you repay the principal on Tuesday when your own funds clear." I pointed to the phone screen, where I had already pulled up the standard one-page consultancy agreement. It's a legally binding, unsecured, 48-hour term. You just need to sign this digital contract right now, granting my consultancy the right to execute this bridge payment on your behalf. Elinor stared at the document, then at my face. She understood. I wasn't asking for money. I was asking for her acknowledgement. A signed, verifiable document that would confirm that in her moment of greatest need, the functionary, the nuisance, the person who was not part of the family, was the only one who could save her public image. She didn't move. The seconds ticked by, loud and heavy. Mr. Giannis coughed delicately. The band outside started a new, upbeat song, a cruel counterpoint to the silent desperation in the room. Finally, her shoulders slumped just a fraction. It was a concession of monumental size. "Give me the pen," she muttered, grabbing the stylus on the desk. "It's a digital signature, Aunt Elinor. Just use your finger," I corrected smoothly. With a look of pure loathing, she signed the screen. I watched the elegant, looping Elinor Hawthorne appear on the document. The contract was executed. I turned the phone to Mr. Giannis. "Mr. Giannis, please provide your payment system's receiving code. The funds will be transferred in less than 60 seconds, legally verified and fully accounted for." He quickly gave me the details. My fingers flew over the keyboard. The final transfer was swift, clean, and instant. $4,000, funds cleared. Mr. Giannis smiled, a genuine professional smile. "Thank you, Ms. Alara. That is fully resolved. The services will continue uninterrupted. My apologies for the alarm, Mrs. Hawthorne." He gave a slight, formal bow and left the office, walking out to ensure his staff continued their work. Silence descended, broken only by the distant sounds of the joyous wedding. I picked up my phone. I folded the contract, now a permanent, time-stamped, legally executed record, into the secure file. I looked at Charles. He managed a weak smile of relief. "Thank you, Alara, truly, you saved the day." I didn't answer him. I looked at Elinor, who was staring at me, her eyes twin chips of granite. "I'm glad I could provide the necessary services, Aunt Elinor," I said, retrieving my phone. "I will send the repayment invoice, including the standard administrative fee, to your office on Tuesday. I trust you won't have any issues with the payment, now that your own funds will be liquid." I stepped around her, my exit as smooth and precise as the financial transaction I had just executed. As I reached the door, I paused and looked back. "And Aunt Elinor," I added, my voice carrying just a hint of steel, "regarding my position in the family, I believe you just signed a legally binding document confirming that I am, in fact, an essential asset." I didn't wait for her reply. I walked out of the office and back into the dazzling light of the ballroom. The music swelled, the crowd was happy, and the party was back on, all thanks to the nuisance who was not one of us. The dress no longer felt like a uniform. It felt like armor. I found Clara on the dance floor, twirling in Robert's arms, her veil catching the spotlights like spun sugar. She looked perfectly happy, blissfully unaware that the foundation of her reception had just wobbled and was only being held up by my newly minted, legally binding contract with her mother. I felt a pang of guilt, swift and sharp, but I pushed it away. Clara's happiness was insulated by her naivete. Aliner's reputation was not. I went back to the bar, not for another drink, but for a glass of sparkling water. I needed clarity now more than ever. The immediate crisis was averted, but the fallout was only beginning. Aliner would be regrouping. She was a master strategist, and while I had won the first skirmish, the war was far from over. She wouldn't simply let the humiliation of signing my contract, a public admission of her financial inadequacy, slide. I scanned the room, noticing that Charles was back at the main table, looking like a ghost at his own celebration. He kept glancing toward the side office, probably expecting the bank to call back and declare the entire mess a bizarre dream. Aliner, however, had disappeared. This was a tactical retreat. She was calculating. I moved to a quiet corner near the floor-to-ceiling windows, pretending to admire the skyline. I knew exactly where she would be. The private powder room adjacent to the main lounge, her preferred sanctuary for venting to her closest confidants. Sure enough, a few minutes later, 3 of her friends, Aunt Beatrice, Mrs. Sterling, and Mrs. Vance, emerged from that lounge, their faces tight with scandalized amusement. I caught a snippet of their conversation as they passed. $4,000. Can you believe it? Aliner Hawthorne running short on liquid funds at her daughter's wedding, Beatrice hissed, her pearls practically rattling. And that girl Ilara, apparently she fixed it, with a consulting fee contract. The cheek, Mrs. Vance responded, adjusting her diamond cuff. Well, she is her mother's daughter, Mrs. Sterling said, her voice dripping with superior pity. Always so resourceful, those little town mice, but you have to admit, Aliner was backed into a corner. The whispers confirmed my success. The narrative was already shifting from Aliner's perfection to her momentary lapse, and my role was being cemented not as the helpful relative, but as the calculating professional who had exploited the lapse. This was precisely the professional distancing I needed. I checked my work phone again. The contract was secure. The $4,000 principal was set to transfer back into my account via the administrative fee on Tuesday. Everything was clean. Then a new thought struck me, an uneasy ripple in my carefully laid plans. The administrative fee. In the rush of the moment, I hadn't specified a percentage. I had simply said it would be settled on Tuesday, leaving it vague to expedite Aliner's signature. Now I realized my oversight. If I set the fee too high, say 50%, it would look like extortion, giving Aliner grounds to challenge the contract's validity later. If I set it too low, say $50, it would undermine the professional image I was trying to establish. I needed the fee to be significant enough to be an insult, but legally defensible as a standard high-risk, short-term liquidity charge. I quickly opened a secure messaging channel to my office's in-house counsel, a dry, brilliant woman named Patricia who understood the art of the legally aggressive invoice. Me urgent, need legally defensible, maximum admin fee for an unsecured 48-hour bridge loan of $4,000, client HNWI, immediate service rendered at 9:15 p.m. EST. Target, maximum deterrence, 0 legal liability. Patricia's reply was almost immediate. She was always working. Patricia, standard rate for this urgency and risk profile is 5.7%. However, for a high-risk, time-critical weekend night emergency deployment, the expedited mobilization surcharge allows for up to 15%. Also, you need a host event disruption waiver. Did they sign a waiver preventing them from disputing services based on emotional duress? My heart sank. A host event disruption waiver. Of course. In my haste, I had forgotten the waiver, which was standard for any financial intervention that occurred during a major social event. Without it, Aliner could easily claim the contract was signed under duress, the duress of the impending closure of her daughter's wedding. It wouldn't nullify the contract, but it would give her powerful leverage to dispute the administrative fee. I looked at the clock. The reception was entering its final, celebratory phase. The cake was about to be cut. I had maybe 15 minutes before the event reached the point of no return. I had to get her to sign the waiver, and the only way to do that was to corner her again. I walked toward the lounge where she had been earlier. It was empty now, save for a few discarded champagne glasses. I found her where I expected, in the private powder room, hunched over the vanity mirror, fiercely reapplying lipstick. She looked less angry and more intensely focused. The momentary panic was over, and the revenge planning had begun. I pushed open the door and stepped inside, letting the door click shut behind me. The scent of her expensive perfume was suffocating. "You should knock, Alara," she said, her voice flat, not bothering to look at me in the mirror. "I need your signature, Annalena. It's a follow-up document for the contract you just signed." I spoke in a calm, purely businesslike voice, cutting through her icy formality. She finally turned, her eyes narrowed. "I signed what I needed to sign. I don't sign blank checks, child." "It's not a blank check. It's the host event disruption waiver," I explained, pulling up the document on my secure phone, already signed by me. "It's a standard clause that simply confirms you are not able to dispute the administrative fee on the grounds of emotional duress or event time coercion. It's required for the immediate processing of the bridge payment." She laughed, a short, harsh sound. "Coercion? Alara, you're threatening your own family over $4,000. You're a disgrace. I will simply claim I signed under duress, and your little fee will be nullified, and you'll be lucky if I ever speak to your mother again." She had figured out the loophole. I had to pivot, and fast. I leaned against the marble counter, adopting a posture of casual confidence that belied the frantic calculations in my head. "You're right, Annalena. You could claim duress, and you would delay the inevitable. But consider this," I said, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The $4,000 you just repaid wasn't the venue's real final payment. That was a 5-figure sum due on Monday morning. Your account is still $4,000 short for that major payment." I watched her face carefully. A tiny flicker of true fear crossed her eyes. She hadn't expected the complexity. "The $4,000 you thought was the final bill was actually the expedited orchestration fee I arranged for Mr. Giannis, paid to me, for all my months of work and last-minute crisis management. I just transferred it to myself, using the access you gave me as a legitimate vendor expense. And I did it before the contract was signed." This was a lie, a magnificent, professional lie. The $4,000 was my fabricated vendor payment, but the idea of a second, larger looming debt was enough to throw her completely off balance. She was a woman who dealt with large figures, and the idea that her accounting was still off by a significant amount was terrifying to her. "The contract you signed," I continued, pressing my advantage, "was not for the initial, fake $4,000 payment. That's gone. It was a bridge loan of $4,000 to cover the actual shortage created by my fee transfer, and to keep the service running until your big wire transfer clears on Tuesday. If you dispute the admin fee for this loan, I will simply cancel the repayment transaction on Tuesday. Mr. Giannis will show up, his bank will reject the large transfer, and the whole scandal will become front-page news. Hawthorne heiress's wedding fails due to final payment dispute." I let the image settle. The headlines, the gossip, the utter destruction of her reputation. "You are not the client here, Annalena. You are the liability. My consultancy is simply ensuring the event does not financially collapse," I concluded, the words sharp and precise. She stared at me, truly seeing me for the first time in 30 years. Not the meek relative, but the professional who held the keys to her reputation. The resistance drained out of her, replaced by a desperate, calculating realization. She needed me to keep quiet about the second debt, and she needed the actual large transfer to go through flawlessly on Tuesday. She needed my cooperation. She grabbed the phone. "The waiver, where do I sign?" I pointed to the designated field for a digital signature. She signed, her finger trembling slightly, confirming her agreement to the host event disruption waiver. The document instantly updated and securely filed. I retrieved my phone, the small victory humming in my chest. The contract was now ironclad. Good. Now I will ensure the full, actual wire transfer for the main venue payment is secured for Tuesday morning. Provided you make no attempt to contact my firm or my counsel between now and then. I laid down the final condition, establishing dominance. You will be repaid your money, and your administrative fee will be settled, she bit out, the concession bitter on her tongue. Now get out, the cake is about to be cut. I gave her a small, tight smile. Enjoy the rest of the wedding, Aunt Alina. It was a pleasure doing business with you. I left the powder room, the sanctuary of her pride now thoroughly breached. I had the contract. I had the waiver. And I had established the lie of the second debt, ensuring her compliance for the next 48 hours. The administrative fee would now be a maximum, legally defensible 15%. That would hurt. I walked out to the ballroom, where the lights had dimmed, and 100 flashbulbs were popping. Clara and Robert stood before a 5-tiered white confection, holding a silver knife. The entire family, including a remarkably composed Alina, was gathered for the perfect, traditional photo op. But I saw the scene differently now. I saw a perfectly managed, beautifully executed financial transaction. And for the first time in my life, I felt not like a shadow at the edge of the family, but the quiet, essential pillar holding the entire structure up. I raised my sparkling water in a private toast to the bride, and the quiet, elegant destruction of the matron's arrogance. The cake cutting was the theatrical zenith of the evening. The flash of the silver knife, the shared, dizzying kiss, it was all perfect, exactly as I had planned it 6 months ago, down to the angle of the ambient lighting. I watched Alina through the throng of well-wishers. She was forcing a wide, beatific smile, but beneath the veneer, her eyes were sharp, constantly tracking the movements of Mr. Giannis and his staff. She was a general who had just suffered a demoralizing defeat and was now terrified of a counterattack. I, conversely, was relaxed. The administrative fee was secured. My position as an essential asset had been ratified by her own signature. The only thing left to do was enjoy the fruits of my labor, a perfect wedding and a guaranteed payout. I even accepted a small, perfect slice of the cake I had helped select, savoring the victory. Clara found me leaning against the wall, observing. She was radiant, her face flushed with champagne and happiness. "Alara, there you are. Why are you hiding in the shadows?" she asked, grabbing my hand, her voice a little slurry with excitement. "Just taking a moment to appreciate the view, Clara. It's truly a beautiful wedding. You outdid yourself," I said honestly. "We outdid ourselves, you know that. Seriously, I don't know what I would have done without you. Mom was all about the guest list and the flowers, but you actually handled the real stuff. The money stuff. The stuff that keeps the wheels turning," she said, squeezing my hand again. Her simple, genuine acknowledgement of my value cut through the corporate steel I had wrapped around myself. It was exactly what I had wanted to hear from Alina, but hearing it from Clara felt cleaner, less corrupted. "I was happy to help," I replied, my voice softer than it had been all night. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Listen, I wanted to tell you something, and I need you to promise you won't tell Mom, or anyone." I raised an eyebrow. My lips are sealed. "Robert and we didn't just merge 2 families, we merged our future. And financially, that means a lot of trust. He's putting a huge amount of capital into a new venture, a sustainability tech startup, and he needs someone to manage the core investment portfolio and all the incoming assets. Not just a bookkeeper, but someone who really understands high-level asset restructuring and risk mitigation." My professional sensors went instantly to red alert. This was not idle wedding chatter. "That's a massive undertaking, Clara. Has he identified anyone suitable?" I asked, my heart rate accelerating. Clara smiled, a wide, knowing grin. "We have, and we've been talking about it for months. Mom wanted him to hire her old friend, Mr. Sterling, the one whose wife thinks you're a town mouse, but Robert thinks he's too old school. We need fresh eyes, someone aggressive, someone sharp as a tack with contracts and due diligence." She paused, looking right into my eyes. The music and the laughter seemed to fade away. "We want to hire you, Alara, not as a cousin, but as a professional. Full-time director of finance. Top salary, stock options, full benefits. We were going to wait until the honeymoon to send the formal offer, but I wanted you to know tonight. It's a clean slate. No family baggage, just business. The proposal landed like a gift. Not just a job, but a position of real power, overseeing the financial destiny of the one family member who actually valued my worth. And it was a position that a leaner would have to witness me succeeding in, without any ability to interfere. It was vindication in the form of a six-figure salary. Clara, I started, trying to keep the shock and elation out of my voice. That is an incredible opportunity. I would be honored to consider it. When are you looking to start the transition? As soon as you can. Robert is chomping at the bit. And honestly, Alara, you're the only one who knows how dysfunctional our family's money really is. You'd be starting with a full audit of all the old accounts that need merging and simplifying. You know, all the trusts and shell companies a leaner sets up just to make things complicated. She rolled her eyes affectionately. My mind immediately flashed back to the Hawthorne bridal expense account, the one I had just drained and refilled. The one I had legally, meticulously, manipulated to extract my fee. An audit, I repeated, the word tasting suddenly metallic. Of everything. Everything, total transparency. We need to know exactly what we're starting with. We don't want any hidden liabilities or unexpected $4,000 holes to pop up later, she said with a light laugh, not realizing the terrifying irony of her statement. My internal systems went from red alert to deep, throbbing crimson. If I took this job, the first task would be a forensic review of the very account I had just targeted. My legal, professional, and entirely justifiable $4,000 extraction, designed to be untraceable by a leaner, would be instantly discoverable by me, the newly appointed director of finance. It would be my own initial report to my new boss, Clara, that would expose my professional maneuver. The discovery would not be that I had stolen, but that I had lied, creating the false narrative of the second debt to force a leaner's hand, while the actual paper trail would reveal a $4,000 transfer from the bridal account to a vendor, my shell company, before the bridge loan was required. The contract I had forced a leaner to sign, the one that validated my worth, would suddenly become a toxic, self-incriminating document. It would confirm that I had deliberately engineered the crisis to extract a fee under duress. That sounds like quite the project, I managed, my smile feeling rigid. It'll be amazing. We're leaving tomorrow morning for Fiji. Take the week to decide, Alara, but we really hope you say yes. We need you. She squeezed my hand one last time and floated back to the dance floor, leaving me standing in a moral and professional minefield. I was trapped. I had successfully leveraged my skills to force a powerful family to acknowledge my value, and in doing so, I had inadvertently created the very thing that would destroy the career opportunity of a lifetime. If I accepted the job, I would have to expose my own actions. If I refused the job, I would reject the one true validation I had ever received from the family, and a leaner would win by default. I needed to find a way to clean the paper trail, or at least neutralize its danger, before the audit commenced. I went back to the quiet corner, pulling out my secure company phone. I needed to analyze the one weakness in my plan, the memo line. When I executed the transfer, I had written, Memo, final venue and catering balance, Hawthorne wedding event. That memo was a lie, and the first thing a forensic audit would flag. I needed to replace that memo with something that made the $4,000 transfer look like a legitimate, pre-planned expenditure that predated the crisis, something that would slip past a simple first-pass audit. But a bank memo for an already executed EFT is immutable. It cannot be changed. It is a permanent digital record. I slumped against the wall, running a desperate hand through my hair. Immutable. That was the challenge. Unless I remembered a trick I'd learned during a hostile corporate takeover, a technique used to obscure massive amounts of leveraged buyout funds. It wasn't about changing the memo on the transfer itself, but about creating an entirely new, overriding document that would legally redefine the purpose of the funds before the audit even began. I opened a new, secure document on my phone. Document title: Pre-Event Consultant Compensation Addendum. I began to draft a new, fictional contract, dated 2 weeks prior to the wedding. It detailed a $4,000 consultant fee paid to my shell company, Event Management Solutions, for exclusive pre-event financial structuring and risk analysis. The fee would perfectly match the amount I had transferred to myself. I then forged Aliner's digital signature from the first contract and pasted it onto this new document. This was crossing a serious line, actual forgery, but it was the only way to save my professional future. With this document, the $4,000 transfer would instantly change from a suspicious emergency vendor payment to a legitimate, prepaid consulting fee. But forgery was too risky. The original contract was digital, with a verifiable timestamp. I couldn't risk having 2 documents signed by Aliner on different dates with the same digital signature. I closed the forgery document, the fear of professional ruin overriding the fear of Aliner. There was only one clean, non-illegal solution left. I had to reverse the original action and then re-execute it under the terms of the new employment offer. I had to put the $4,000 back into the Hawthorne Bridal Expense account tonight. I pulled up the account details. I could execute an immediate internal transfer. The account would be instantly balanced. The lie of the second debt would remain, and the original self-serving transfer would be canceled. But if I did that, the entire confrontation, the contract, the waiver, the humiliation of Aliner would have been pointless. My administrative fee would be gone. My vindication would be unpaid. I looked across the room at Aliner, who was now beaming, confident that she had merely signed a loan and would pay a small, irritating fee on Tuesday. You're not part of the family. The words still sting. I didn't want the money, I wanted the cost to her. I made my decision. I would take the job, but I would not let the humiliation go unpaid. I opened my messaging app to Patricia, my in-house counsel, and sent a final, crucial message. Me, cancel the 15% admin fee on the $4,000 bridge loan. Invoice the Hawthorns a flat, non-disputable fee of $50 for event time digital documentation and processing. Send it Tuesday. Do not mention the previous $4,000 transfer in the invoice details. Close the temporary vendor account immediately after the $4,000 principal repayment is received. The $50 fee was trivial, a symbolic slap on the wrist. But by revering the initial, self-serving transfer and then canceling the 15% fee, I would be clean for the audit. The only thing remaining on the books would be the legitimate bridge loan and a tiny, clean administrative fee. The audit would pass flawlessly. My new job would be secured. I watched Aliner, her triumph restored. She thought she had won. She thought I was just a minor annoyance she could swat away on Tuesday. But she hadn't won. She had signed the contract. She had admitted her failure. And I had secured a future where I would be managing all her family's money, legally and professionally, from a position of undeniable power. My vindication wouldn't be $600. It would be a corner office and the keys to her family's financial kingdom. I put my phone away. The wedding was still perfect. The music was joyous. I had made a difficult choice, sacrificing a small, temporary victory for a massive, permanent gain. It felt exactly like something a true professional would do. The decision to sacrifice the administrative fee for the sake of the director of finance position settled in my stomach like cold meat. It was a professional victory, but an emotional concession. The $50 fee, a trivial digital documentation charge, would be a clean, non-disputable expense. It ensured my immediate financial audit would be spotless and guaranteed the job. I had traded a moment of spiteful satisfaction for a future of true pride. I had 30 minutes until the reception ended and the newlyweds departed. I decided to make my exit before Aliner reappeared. My work was done, and prolonging my presence would only invite a final, potentially messy confrontation. I preferred to conduct my professional life via invoice and contract, not shouted exchanges in a cloakroom. I approached the family table to say my goodbyes. Charles, the perpetually weary husband, was genuinely grateful. Alara, please, let me pay you something now, he whispered, fumbling with his wallet. The trouble you went to. Absolutely not, Uncle Charles. I cut him off gently. The invoice will arrive on Tuesday. Everything is handled through the consultancy now. Just consider it a professional courtesy until then. I maintained the lie of the second. Looming debt, ensuring their continued caution. I gave Clara a genuine hug. Congratulations, darling. Have a marvelous time in Fiji. And please think seriously about my offer, she whispered in my ear. I will, and I'll be in touch, I promised, the weight of the potential job pressing down on me. I turned to leave, but fate, or perhaps Alina's impeccable timing, intervened. She emerged from the ladies' room, having fully restored her composure and apparently formulated her strategy. She stopped me with a voice that was saccharine sweet, radiating fake warmth. Alara, leaving so soon. I was just telling the Harrisons how marvelously helpful you've been. I turned, giving her a polite, distant smile. Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, the same couple I had been warned not to network with, stood beside her, looking bored but attentive. Annalena, I was just saying goodbye. The evening was flawless. Flawless, yes, and thanks to your quick thinking, we averted a truly silly administrative blip. Charles and I have been discussing it, she said, her arm now linked through mine, a horrifying display of forced intimacy. And we realized how much stress we put on you, maid of honor and the financial logistics. Too much, dear, far too much. Her tone was condescending, but the words were a concession. She was trying to publicly diminish the crisis and simultaneously diminish my competence, framing my financial fix as the result of her mistake in overloading me, not my skill. Not at all, Annalena. It was a simple professional task. I was happy to assist, I replied, pulling my arm gently away. Alina seized the opportunity. She turned to Mr. Harrison, presenting me like a quaint artifact. Mr. Harrison, you mentioned earlier how impressed you were with Alara's business acumen. She is quite clever with numbers. A little overly eager, perhaps, but capable. She actually helped us set up a tiny, personal investment vehicle for Clara and Robert's wedding gifts. Just a small, short-term fund to manage the checks until they can be properly distributed into their trusts. I froze. The lie was stunning in its audacity. She was using my professional reputation, the one she had just tried to destroy, to sell me to the Harrisons as a safe, manageable financial resource, a clever but ultimately low-level helpmeet. She's been managing that account for us for some time, Alina continued smoothly, and she actually decided, on her own initiative, to transfer a small $4,000 consultant fee to herself tonight as payment for that long-standing service. So creative. We had a small moment of confusion over the transfer, but it was just her professional enthusiasm running a little hot. My blood ran cold. She had just publicly rewritten the narrative of the crisis. There was no bounced payment, no bridge loan, no humiliation. The $4,000 missing money was now a pre-planned, authorized consultant fee I had already taken for my work on a wedding gift fund. She was preempting the Tuesday repayment and the inevitable gossip. By claiming the fee was already paid, she ensured that when the actual, tiny $50 invoice arrived, it would look like an insignificant final expense, not the evidence of a financial crisis. It was brilliant. It was also an outright professional slander that would make me look greedy and unprofessional to the Harrisons. Mr. Harrison nodded slowly, looking at me with thinly veiled amusement. Ah, the enterprising young professional. Excellent initiative, Alara. But perhaps next time, run the consultant fee by the principal first, eh? Clarity is key. He delivered the rebuke with a smile, but the damage was done. My professional reputation was already tarnished in the eyes of the key players in her circle. I was the capable but trash girl who took her own payment without permission. Alina gave me a triumphant, knowing look, confirming her victory. I had 3 seconds to respond and reclaim my narrative. My internal financial calculator was running at top speed, not for numbers, but for words. Actually, Annalena, that's not quite right, I said, my voice calm and perfectly level, drawing the Harrisons' attention back to me. Eleanor's smile tightened. Now, Alara, don't be modest. I'm not being modest. I'm being precise. The $4,000 you are referring to was not my fee for managing the gift fund. That fund is a separate pro bono service I offered to Clara, and the funds are still completely secure. I paused, meeting Mr. Harrison's steady gaze. The $4,000 I transferred tonight was actually the initial, required seed capital for Robert and Clara's new venture. I lied, effortlessly folding my new job offer into my defense. As the incoming director of finance for their new sustainability tech startup, it was my fiduciary duty to secure the initial operating capital immediately upon the couple's marriage. I executed an immediate asset transfer to the venture's secure trust, as per my new mandate. Eleanor blinked. The words director of finance and fiduciary duty hit her like a surprise check. She hadn't expected the news of my new job to be public, especially not in front of her friends. The confusion, I continued, pressing the advantage, arose because the Hawthorne Bridal Expense account was the most liquid source of immediate capital, as designated by Uncle Charles. The transfer was completely authorized and essential to ensure the venture received its first capital injection on the first possible business day. I turned the tables completely. My $4,000 transfer was no longer a selfish fee. It was an act of high-level corporate foresight, securing the future of the newlyweds' multi-million-dollar venture. I looked directly at Mr. Harrison. The only error was in the memo line, which I mislabeled as vendor payment instead of seed capital transfer. My apologies, Aunt Eleanor, for the technical confusion. Mr. Harrison's whole demeanor changed. He wasn't looking at a rash girl anymore. He was looking at a high-stakes, aggressive financial player. A sustainability tech startup. Robert never mentioned that, Mr. Harrison said, looking intrigued. It's confidential, of course, I said with a light, dismissive wave. But yes, the initial capital is now secured. I believe Clara and Robert were planning to discuss the investment structure on their return. They are looking for strategic partners. I had not just neutralized Eleanor's slander. I had leveraged it into a public, professional announcement of my new role, and had dangled a lucrative investment opportunity in front of one of the most powerful men in the room. Eleanor's face was a study in pure, unadulterated shock. She couldn't dispute the transfer, because that would expose the truth. She couldn't dispute my new title, because that would make her look uninformed in front of the Harrisons. She was trapped in the web of my counterlie. Well now, Mr. Harrison said. His eyes gleaming, he pulled a discreet card from his wallet. Alara, congratulations on the new role and excellent initiative with the seed capital. That's the kind of decisive action we appreciate. We should talk about the strategic partnership when you're settled in. Call me next week. He handed me his card, a significant gesture that completely bypassed Eleanor. Thank you, Mr. Harrison. I will be in touch, I said, tucking the card into my clutch. I turned back to Eleanor, who had lost her color. If you'll excuse me, Aunt Eleanor, I have to prepare for an incoming wire transfer early Tuesday morning, and I need to ensure all the final accounts, including my professional one, are perfectly squared away. I didn't wait for a response. I walked away, leaving her standing there, a defeated monarch at the end of her perfectly ruined reception. The sting of the $4,000 loss was now compounded by the public knowledge that the family nuisance was now the highly paid financial gatekeeper of the newly merged family fortune. I was not just part of the family, I was the one holding the checkbook. I didn't stop to retrieve my coat. I just walked straight out of the ballroom and into the crisp, late-night city air. The sapphire silk dress, which had felt like a suffocating costume hours earlier, now felt like the banner of my triumph. I wasn't just escaping. I was executing a clean, decisive exit, exactly how I preferred to end any situation. The moment I reached the curb, I hailed a cab. The driver, a kind man with a thick beard, asked if the wedding had been fun. Fascinating, I replied, sinking back into the seat. Very successful professionally. Once the cab pulled into traffic, I opened my phone. The events of the last hour, the contract, the waiver, the public counter-slander, and the massive job offer were swirling, But my mind had to be entirely focused on the immediate, tangible future, the audit. I had successfully reversed my original, self-serving transfer and canceled the high administrative fee. The Hawthorne Bridal Expense account was now balanced, making the past crisis officially invisible to a forensic review. However, my public declaration that I was the new director of finance and had executed a $4,000 seed capital transfer created an entirely new, massive vulnerability. Clara in Fiji would expect to see that $4,000 transfer in the newly established venture account when she returned. More importantly, Mr. Harrison, the powerful investor, would certainly be checking in with Robert, the groom, to verify my claims about the confidential startup and the secured seed capital. If Robert, who is currently preoccupied with wedding bliss, couldn't produce the account details showing the $4,000, my entire, carefully constructed counter-narrative would collapse. I would look like a desperate liar who had exploited family tensions to secure a job and impress an investor. I had 48 hours until Tuesday morning when the actual funds, Eliner's locked-up wealth, would clear, and the real final payments were made. I needed to move fast and clean. First, I messaged Patricia, my counsel, confirming the details. Me, urgent follow-up. Final confirmation. Cancel original 15% fee. Invoice Hawthorne's $50 flat rate for digital documentation and processing on Tuesday. Most importantly, I am transferring $4,000 immediately from my personal savings to the Hawthorne Bridal Expense account now to clear the final balance error. Please verify the account shows a clean, zero balance by the morning. Patricia, copy that. Transferring $4,000 to correct deficit. Very clean move, Alara. Professional. The account will be pristine by 8 a.m. I executed the transfer. $4,000, a significant chunk of my personal savings, disappeared from my account and reappeared in the Hawthorne account. The original transfer of the same amount, which was now legally classified as the bridge loan principal repayment, meant the account was now perfectly balanced. The audit trail was spotless. Now for the far more difficult part, creating the seed capital trail. I had to make the $4,000 appear to have moved from the Hawthorne account to the new ventures account, just as I had publicly claimed to Mr. Harrison. I was the incoming director of finance, so I had the mandate to set up the new ventures financial structure. I directed the cab driver to take me to my office downtown. The lights of the financial district were cold and reassuring. Once inside my office, a sterile, quiet space overlooking the sleeping city, I initiated the formation of the new legal entity. Clara and Robert had mentioned sustainability tech. In less than 20 minutes, I had filed the Articles of Incorporation for Ethos Solutions, LLC, the official name of Robert's new company. The documents were notarized, submitted to the state registry, thanks to my firm's 24/7 corporate compliance access, and the new entity was legally valid. Next, the bank account. Using my professional credentials and the new corporate documents, I initiated a high-speed, secure corporate checking account for Ethos Solutions, LLC. Account number established. Now for the money, the $4,000. I couldn't transfer it from the Hawthorne account again. That would unbalance the books. I had to transfer $4,000 into the Ethos Solutions account from an outside source and create a corresponding document that made it look like it came from the Hawthornes. I logged into a highly discreet, separate professional account I maintained, a contingency fund for unusual client needs. I transferred $4,000 into the Ethos Solutions account. The memo read, Initial seed capital, founding partner transfer. The Ethos Solutions account now had $4,000. The final critical step, the paper trail. I created a perfectly backdated, authorized financial document. Document title, Initial Capital Deployment Authorization, Ethos Solutions, LLC. Date, 2020-5090 to 2 weeks before the wedding, establishing a long-term plan. Source, Hawthorne Bridal Expense Account. Destination, Ethos Solutions, LLC Seed Capital Trust. Amount, $4,000. Purpose, founding member equity contribution, immediate liquidity. I ensured the document included an internal transfer authorization signed by Charles Hawthorne, a signature I was intimately familiar with from all the wedding contracts, and a second sign-off by Alara Hayes, future Director of Finance. I had to forge Charles's signature again, but this time it was not for personal gain. It was to protect my new fiduciary role and, ironically, the future of the family's investment. This document was the bulletproof legal justification for the existence of the $4,000 in the new ventures account. With this paper trail in place, here was the reality. One Hawthorne bridal expense account, balanced. The initial questionable transfer was simply reversed and replaced by my own money. The only incoming charge would be the $50 documentation fee. Clean. Two Ethos Solutions, LLC account, holds $4,000. 3. Audit. When Clara checks the accounts, she will find the Hawthorne account clean, and the Ethos Solutions account with the exact $4,000 I claimed. She will find the initial capital deployment authorization document, signed by her father and me, proving the transaction was authorized and planned long ago. Perfect. 4. My investment. I had personally funded the seed capital for the new company. I was now not just the director of finance, but a secret, silent, initial investor, a founding partner. I leaned back in my chair, the exhaustion finally hitting me. I had successfully managed a multi-party, high-stakes financial crisis, secured a top executive position, and publicly humiliated my adversary, all while risking my own capital and professional ethics. I smiled, a slow, tired smile. The $4,000 wasn't a cost. It was a perfectly executed, risk-adjusted equity investment. I packed my laptop and the secure phone, ready to leave the office. Just as I reached the elevator, my personal phone rang. It was my mother. I hesitated, bracing myself. She was the one person who would truly see the moral complexity of what I had done. I answered, "Hi, Mom, did you have a nice evening?" "Alara," she said, her voice quiet and steady. "I got a call about an hour ago from a leaner. She was quite emotional." My stomach tightened. What did she say? She was furious. She said you used my address to send a fake vendor invoice to her, and then you somehow manipulated the final payments to steal $4,000. She said you are a thief and that she will see you in court. My heart sank. She didn't call to praise my success. She called to announce the opening salvo of a leaner's revenge. "Mom, that's not what happened. I can explain the legal contract, the bridge loan, and the—" "I know, honey. I know the contracts and the lies." But she wasn't calling to threaten me. She was calling to tell me she had decided to cancel the generous check she sent me weeks ago, the one for your costs that she mentioned. She said since you had already compensated yourself, she was freezing the funds. My mind raced. The generous check. The check my mother had received weeks ago to cover the initial dress cost and travel, money that my mother desperately needed for her house repairs. The amount of that check was $6,000. I had just fought tooth and nail for a $600 administrative fee, now a $50 fee, and had invested $4,000 of my own capital, only for a leaner to casually retract a completely separate $6,000 payment that meant far more to my mother than any of us. The emotional cost of my victory was suddenly, brutally, real. "I have to go, Mom. I'll call you back," I said, my voice tight, hanging up before she could say another word. I walked back into my office, the professional steel cracking to reveal a white-hot core of pure, righteous rage. Eleanor wasn't fighting me anymore. She was fighting my mother. I sat back down at my desk, pulling up the contract she had signed, the legally binding one for the $4,000 bridge loan. I had been prepared to be clean, professional, and ethical for the new job. But Eleanor had just declared a personal war. And in war, you use every weapon at your disposal. I pulled up the secure file with the original $4,000 vendor payment transfer, the one I had reversed to clean the audit. The paper trail might have been scrubbed from the bank's external view, but the internal details of the transfer still existed within my firm's secure financial log, showing the initial, real-time transaction. I knew I couldn't risk the job, but I could leverage the one thing Alina valued more than money: her impeccable, unblemished public history. I started a new document, a draft press release, one that detailed the entire financial blip at the Hawthorne wedding, the bounced payment, the emergency loan, and the unexpectedly aggressive clawback of a personal gift to the mother of the maid of honor. All legally justifiable under the terms of the documents Alina had signed. I didn't send it, not yet. I just saved it, a loaded gun waiting in the digital vault. I then pulled up the Ethos Solutions LLC corporate registry. I had created the company. I was the one who had funded the initial capital. I was the director of finance. With a few quick taps, I updated the corporate documents. Robert was still the CEO. Clara was the president. And I, Alara Hayes, was now listed not only as the director of finance, but also as the initial funding partner and strategic investment controller. Alina wanted to freeze $6,000 from my mother. Fine. I would ensure that not one single dollar of the family's subsequent investment would flow into the new venture without my direct, final authorization. I was not just managing their money anymore. I was controlling it, and I was now a legally recognized owner. My fury wasn't a flare-up. It was a cold, sustained burn. Alina's attack on my mother was the fatal error, the shift from a professional rivalry to a deeply personal war. I sat in my office chair, the city lights blurring outside, and focused on the undeniable reality. I had invested $4,000 of my own savings into the Ethos Solutions, LLC seed capital, and I was now legally listed as the strategic investment controller and a founding partner. I needed one final, undeniable piece of leverage. I pulled up the draft press release I had prepared. It was a precise, fact-based account of the wedding's financial blip, detailing the emergency loan, the bounced payment, and culminating in the shocking decision by Mrs. Alina Hawthorne to retaliate by freezing a prearranged, critical $6,000 personal gift to the maid of honor's struggling family. It was poison, designed to dismantle Alina's carefully curated image as a benevolent society patron. I saved the document, but still didn't send it. My move had to be surgical, not messy. On Tuesday morning, I was in my office well before dawn, watching my banking terminal. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, the primary wire transfer from Alina's main trust account cleared, paying the massive final installment to the venue. Simultaneously, the final transactions related to the wedding budget executed. The $4,000 bridge loan principal from Alina's account was paid back into my firm's account, and the $50 digital documentation invoice was processed. The Hawthorne bridal expense account was finally closed, fully reconciled. My slate was clean. Her debt to the venue was paid. At 9:05 a.m., my personal phone rang. It was Aunt Alina, her voice a low, vibrating wire of controlled rage. "You are going to hear from my lawyers today, Alara. I've seen your trivial $50 invoice. It's a pathetic joke. You think a $50 fee makes up for what you did, and I know you lied to the Harrisons. Robert and Clara are on a boat in the middle of the Pacific, and there is no seed capital account." She was bluffing about the seed capital. She hadn't checked the corporate registry yet. "Aunt Alina," I said calmly, leaning back, "the $50 fee covers the legal documentation I prepared at 9:30 p.m. Saturday to prevent your daughter's wedding from being shut down, and you signed the waiver confirming you would not dispute it. You are a thief, Alara. You manipulated that account, and freezing your mother's check was justified. You will never touch a dollar of my family's money again." "You think I'm a thief for extracting a deserved fee," I countered, my voice gaining a razor edge. "But you are stealing $6,000 from my mother, who earned that money by raising a child who became competent enough to save your entire public image." I delivered the final, crushing blow. "And you are wrong about the seed capital. Robert and Clara's new company is called Ethos Solutions, LLC. It was registered on Saturday night. I am the director of finance, and I personally transferred the $4,000 initial seed capital into the corporate account. I letting that sink in. But more importantly, Madeline, I continued, my voice now slow and deliberate. I am also listed in the corporate documents as the strategic investment controller and founding partner. Every subsequent dollar that is invested, be it from Robert's inheritance, Clara's trust, or a new partner like Mr. Harrison, will pass through my direct legal authorization. You can freeze my mother's name, but you cannot stop me from controlling your family's financial future. Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. You can hire 10 lawyers, I concluded, and they will find my actions on Saturday night. The transfers, the contracts, the corporate filings, to be immaculate, legal, and completely secured by your own signatures. I gave up the professional fee to secure the professional power. You lost both. You leveraged my debt to steal a position of power, she finally whispered, the horror of the realization raw in her voice. I didn't steal it, Aunt Alina. I earned it, and unlike you, I paid for it with my own money. I let the full weight of the situation crush her. I was now the financial gatekeeper to the next generation's fortune, a position she could neither buy nor prevent. I will be sending you a final invoice this afternoon, I said. Not for money, but for a decision. You have 2 hours to decide whether you will release my mother's $6,000 payment immediately, or if I will be sending a detailed press release to the Wall Street Journal, explaining exactly how the Hawthorne family matriarch attempted to claw back a gift from her own sister, all because she couldn't afford a final $4,000 payment at her daughter's wedding. I hung up the phone. The next 2 hours were agonizing. I stared at the press release, my finger hovering over the send button. I didn't want to destroy Clara's nascent venture with scandal, but I couldn't let my mother suffer. At 11:00 a.m. exactly, my mother called back. Her voice was bright, almost giddy. Alara, what did you do? I just checked the account. The bank confirmed it. The $6,000 check, the one Alina froze, just cleared. She released the funds. I closed my eyes, a wave of profound relief and triumph washing over me. She also left a message with the bank, my mother added, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. She said, "Tell my sister that the maid of honor's services were far more expensive than I anticipated." I smiled, a genuine, hard-won smile. The $6,000 was safe. Alina's humiliation was complete. I immediately opened a new, secure communication channel to Mr. Harrison, attaching the full, verifiable corporate documents for Ethos Solutions, LLC. Me, Mr. Harrison, the final administrative details are settled. The Ethos Solutions seed capital is secured. I look forward to discussing your strategic partnership interest with Robert and Clara upon their return from Fiji. As the strategic investment controller, I will be the one authorizing all incoming capital. I clicked send. The battle was over. I hadn't needed to steal, forge, or permanently burn any bridges. I had simply played the game better, using professionalism, contracts, and ruthless foresight to secure my power and protect my own. I picked up the key to my newly assigned, permanent office, the one that came with the Director of Finance title, and walked out of the consulting firm's office for the last time. I was no longer the town mouse or the functionary. I was Alara Hayes, a founding partner who had cost the matriarch of the Hawthorne family not a trivial $4,000, but the entire priceless currency of her control. I was finally part of the family, the only part that mattered, the one in charge of the money.